Cuban dictator freaks out because Trump deployed an American force in the Caribbean at the worst possible time for Havana. On Monday, June 1st, 2026, Miguel Diaz-Canel and the old Castro regime look at the region and see the United States Southern Command with more than 1,300 Marine sailors and naval personnel on alert as part of Operation Southern Spear. This movement is not happening in isolation. What is Trump preparing? Why did Havana go on alert? How does this siege completely change the game? I'll tell you all about it in a moment. If you like this kind of straightforward, no-nonsense content, consider subscribing because we have videos like this every day. The Southern Command confirmed that the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit has taken on the role of a literal combat force in the American area of responsibility for Latin America and the Caribbean. The group enters as an immediate crisis force with the ability to reinforce embassies, recover personnel in emergencies, support humanitarian actions, conduct maritime interdiction, and combat illicit networks. In official language, it's called regional readiness. In political terms, it's a direct warning to regimes and structures that have gotten used to challenging Washington without paying a price. Part of this structure can operate on land with infantry and security units. Another part works with aviation, communication, transportation, reconnaissance, and rapid deployment. And another supports the mission with logistics, maintenance, supplies, and naval support. What happened was the change of readiness in the regional theater, with this unit taking on the role of immediate response force for crises. How it works is simple. The force stays ready to respond before the crisis gets out of control, whether by sea, land, or air, without relying on a slow mobilization. Trump wants to make it clear that the Western Hemisphere will not be handed over to dictatorships, drug trafficking, migration pressure, the influence of China and Russia, or networks that threaten American interests. For the Cuban regime, the message is tough. The United States has placed a flexible, mobile, and ready force at the region's doorstep at a time when Havana is facing blackouts, fuel shortages, internal crisis, and diplomatic pressure. You don't need to declare war to cause a tremor in the powerful, just show that now there are trained troops, a ship in position, command activated, and a ready response. The force of 1,300 military personnel, which is now near Cuba, is the replacement for the force that was in the Caribbean when Maduro fell. This sends an even stronger message to Havana. Trump kept the same pressure point active, swapped out the military unit, renewed readiness, and left a new American force ready in the region. After an operation that has already shown that Washington can act quickly when it decides to tighten the noose and overthrow a dictator. Havana sees this move as a threat because the island is weak from within. The population feels the collapse at home, in transportation, in water, in hospitals, and in small businesses. The regime blames the United States, but the wear and tear comes from decades of a controlled economy, external dependence, and power concentrated in the hands of the communist elite. Trump tightened exactly where the regime is most vulnerable. The White House made it clear that any relief depends on real change in Havana. Either the regime makes room for change or it keeps sinking in front of its own people. The presence of between 1,000 and 1,300 troops in the Caribbean changes the calculation even before any operation. It protects American interests, embassies, United States personnel, maritime routes, and the Guantanamo base. It also shows China, Russia, and Havana's allies that the Western Hemisphere is not empty. Cuba has always tried to survive by relying on external patrons. First it clung to the Soviet Union, then it depended on Venezuelan oil. Now it tries to balance between Moscow, Beijing, and talks with Washington. Miguel Diaz-Canel tries to respond with a speech about sovereignty. Cuban authorities talk about the risk of military aggression and accuse Washington of fabricating pretexts. But state television doesn't turn on the lights, doesn't fuel the buses, and doesn't fill the shelves. The American base in Guantanamo has gained importance in this scenario. General Francis Donovan, head of the Southern Command, was in the region and met with Cuban military authorities near the perimeter of the naval base. The official topic was operational security, force protection, and communication between the sides. Even so, the scene carries political weight. The head of the Southern Command went to the regime's doorstep, inspected the area, and kept the military channel open at the same time Washington increased the pressure. For Havana, this is pure discomfort. Marco Rubio reinforced this stance by speaking directly to the Cuban people and separating the population from the regime's machinery. The proposal of $100 million in humanitarian aid, with food, medicine, and support through channels outside Havana's political control, hit the dictatorship's sensitive spot. The regime wants aid, but it wants to control the entry, the distribution, and the narrative. Trump and Rubio set the condition that dismantles the charade. Aid needs to reach the people. It can't become a propaganda tool for the Communist Party. That's where the Havana outbreak comes in. The regime accuses the United States of pressure, but gets upset when Washington tries to prevent aid from being seized by the state system. The crisis stops being just a lack of energy and becomes a test of the regime's character. The Caribbean enters this story as an area of American national security. The region involves international trafficking, maritime routes, irregular immigration, influence from United States adversaries, and the risk of collapse just a few miles from Florida. Operation Salford Spear was designed to synchronize military pressure, intelligence, and combat against illicit networks in the Western Hemisphere. That's why the Marine Force isn't just for show. It's a readiness asset, capable of moving in a crisis and supporting quick decisions. The choice of the 24th Expeditionary Unit also carries a message. It's not a symbolic force. It's a force trained to respond to emergencies, protect facilities, recover personnel, and operate in difficult environments. The presence of the USS Fort Lauderdale in the region reinforces mobility and support. For the average Cuban, the news shatters the propaganda narrative that the regime controls everything. For the Cuban command, it becomes a military, political, and psychological issue. Cuba tries to talk tough, but knows it does not face the United States on equal terms. That's why it bets on the victim narrative, the fear of intervention, and ideological mobilization. The problem is that the Cuban people see reality without any filter. If it refuses and keeps using suffering as a political shield, social unrest is likely to grow. American forces should remain on alert. Southern Command should increase surveillance, and the White House should keep sanctions, diplomacy, and legal pressure all in play. Miguel Diaz-Canel can keep shouting against Trump, but every blackout, every line, and every forced retreat showed that the siege has reached his doorstep. I'm Milson Alves, global internationalist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves community.